Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex. Today we're going to be taking a look at a few players that had their stocks elevate and stocks drop. After the Jets vs. Giants preseason game, of course, we saw a lot of negatives, but we saw some positives too. And I want to talk about those specific players and really where they're going, how we can supplement some of these deficiencies, because the Giants have a shit ton of them, guys. They have a lot of deficiencies. And at this point, we really need to figure out how we're going to roll into the season without dooming our quarterback and Daniel Jones, because our offensive line is a mess. I don't know, if the secondary has too many good pieces, maybe we can trade somebody off. If the wide receiver position, the big concern for me here is that we allocated a lot of money, a lot of funds toward positions that don't really matter unless your quarterback is good, right? You have a great running back, you have a great wide receiver core, but those two positions don't really matter if your offensive line is trash. And that's the thing the Giants have been trying to build this offensive line for years now. Dave Gettleman promised us he would solve this position, and here we are still waiting for that reality to come true. And I think at this point after the first couple of years with Dave Gettleman, we've seen some ups, we've seen some downs. The majority of them have been downs. We've seen some really good players that we are optimistic about, but really they didn't start to filter in until after they got Joe Judge. And I do want to, obviously give credit to Gettleman for his free agency selections and whatnot, but we need to see this offense take a step forward. Of course, having a great defense is essential in the NFL, but having a great offense is the modern way to win games. We've seen the last couple of Super Bowl teams have skeptical secondaries. Their secondaries allow a pretty good amount of yards, but their offense is just so good. They're so high octane. You have Tampa Bay, the Chiefs. They just continuously score points, and evidently you just can't really overcome those teams if they're scoring 35 to 40 points on you. Even if you're at the bottom of the NFL in terms of points allowed per game, which is probably around like 32 to 30 points per game, if the other team is scoring 35 on average, it doesn't matter how bad your defense is, because as long as they're holding it to their average, which is 30, 32 points, you're still going to win games. So that offensive factor is turning into a really big one. But I want to take a look at a couple of players. I wrote an article discussing a couple of them. And the first one, David Sills, man. This guy has been absolutely slaying. We've talked about him continuously over the last couple of weeks leading up to the first preseason game, and he did not disappoint. He was one of the top performers for the Giants on the night. He recorded 3 receptions for 49 yards, including a 37-yard completion, right? He had a really nice hands. He had some really nice breaks on his routes, and his technique looked pretty solid. He got some separation. That's all we're looking for, some separation. He's 6'4", similar height to Kenny Golladay, and now the Giants are looking at him and saying, what can he offer us on game day? Because ultimately, when it comes to back-end wide receivers, you kind of need them to be a little bit more valuable than just a receiver. They need to have some sort of utilization on special teams. Now, David Sills doesn't really have any abilities on special teams. He's been working as a gunner occasionally, but at the end of the day, he doesn't really offer much value there because he's not like that strong. He's not that type of player. That's why they really like C.J. Board, because C.J. Board also is a gunner and he's a good one. And the Giants might look to him and say, maybe we'll stick with that guy because of that reason. And then you have John Ross, who's also a good kick returner. He didn't play in the first preseason game. So the Giants have a few big decisions to make, but David Sills was absolutely the best receiver for them on the evening, and I think that's something that really stood out to me, and I know it stood out to a lot of other people. So I'm expecting him to get a spot on the 53-man roster. And look, there's only 2 gunner spots anyway, so at the end of the day, the Giants might end up having Cam Brown play a gunner spot. They might end up having Rodarius Williams play a gunner spot. Who knows? It doesn't have to be a receiver, so also keep that in mind. The second guy that really stood out to me, his stock increased big time, Carter Coughlin. Carter Coughlin got some really great reviews from Joe Judge after the game. He was one of the players that really stood out to him. Carter Coughlin's making that transition from outside linebacker to weak side linebacker, picked up 5 tackles, a sack, and a tackle for a loss. He was all over the field, just an absolute monster performance from him, making that transition to weak side linebacker where they have Tate Crowder. TJ Brunson just tore his ACL, so he's out. He's done for the year. That's a big loss, or at least it's a big loss in terms of the depth we have at that linebacker spot, because TJ Brunson was a practice squad guy last year, but I think for the most part, the Giants feel, or at least they felt like he could offer them some value as a late round pick. I think he was a 7th rounder last year. So we'll see what happens there, but torn ACL, he's done. The Giants now really need Carter Coughlin to make that successful transition to weak side linebacker, because he did look good. I think he probably looked even a little bit better than Brunson, who did record a sack, and he recorded a forced fumble that Rodarius Williams picked up and almost took to the house. But Coughlin making that transition, I really like that for him. I think, he's a really solid pass rusher, but I think they want to use him as like a specified spy because the Giants love to spy on those mobile quarterbacks. And I think for the most part, if you're looking at Carter Coughlin, he did that against the Seattle Seahawks and Russell Wilson last year, and he was an absolute stud. He really showed out in that way, and I really want to see him continue to build those skills as more of a run-stopping kind of role, but also maybe have some sort of abilities as a pass coverage linebacker as well. It's going to take time, but having a guy with his type of attributes and skill set and the ability to rush the passer, it really makes him that much more valuable. So hopefully he can really increase his production there. So the next guy on the list that has his stock increase, Danny Shelton. Danny Shelton is the guy they brought in to essentially replace Dalvin Tomlinson. Now, Dalvin Tomlinson, you can't really replace him, but I will say it's probably the easiest to replace defensive tackles in the NFL. When you're, especially a nose tackle, that's a guy the Giants have just been continuously rotating at that position for years now. Whether it be Dalvin Tomlinson or there's a Linval Joseph. They've had a ton of different guys over the past. They let them all walk in free agency, and they seem to be fine. That method seems to work with them quite well. So Danny Shelton, a guy they brought in, he's like 6'2", 340 pounds, just an absolute unit of a human being. And he made a really nice play on Ty Johnson. He caused a turnover on downs. The Jets tried an inside zone run, and he stuffed him, clogged the gap with his massive frame, and I thought that was a great play from him. That's exactly what they want him to do. That increased his stock for me. The next guy who had a red zone fumble, Corey Clement. He's been looking really good during training camp. People have even been saying he's looked better than Devontae Booker, who the Giants signed to a 2-year deal. It's really 1 year with an out after the first year. But he did have 32 yards on 5 carries, 6.4 yards per attempt. He showed some nice burst on his runs. He's also a solid receiving back, and he's decent as a pass blocker as well. So when I'm looking at Corey Clement, of course, the red zone fumble really stands out. That's a big problem. Can't do that stuff. But at the end of the day, aside from that, he looks really good. He has some burst. He's hitting the gaps hard. He looks to be vying for a starting roster spot on this team, or not starting, but rather a nice reserve spot. And I think the Giants will value that. Having 3 running backs on the roster is pretty normal, and I think that Corey Clement will probably steal that role. I know they have Gary Brightwell, a couple other guys, but Gary Brightwell, and by the way, the Giants' offensive line, and we're going to talk about that in a second. There's most of our downward trending players, our down stock, are on the offensive line, but I have to say the Chiefs landing Trey Smith in the 6th round and us getting Gary Brightwell out of Arizona, who hasn't even taken a snap in practice yet, is very concerning. Very concerning. I know the blood clots were a little bit problematic. A lot of teams passed on him for that reason, but it's a 6th round pick. What do you have to lose? Just sign Corey Clement to a veteran minimum deal, and then you don't have to worry about the running back position. He's making the same as a rookie anyway. And at the end of the day, Trey Smith was a 2nd round grade, a 3rd round graded offensive lineman. He's about to start. He's about to take over a starting guard spot for the Chiefs, who were just in the Super Bowl and won one 2 years ago. This is a team that's already established, and they just got a 6th round steal in Trey Smith. And the Giants over here desperately need offensive line help, and meanwhile, we're going out and drafting freaking running backs in the 6th round again. Sometimes they blow my mind with these decisions, but that was a surprise. We were all begging for Trey Smith. Come on, 6th round, what do you have to lose? The Giants, most 6th round picks will never even see the field to begin with. So it's really disappointing to see that the Giants once again whiffed on an offensive lineman. I don't understand their mentality there. And we're going to talk about the lack of depth there in a second when you see how bad they performed. But let's talk about 2 more players that had their stock increase. Sandro Platzschumer, the Austrian native, in that kind of international program with the NFL. He had a 48-yard run, picked up 51 yards on 4 carries. But at the end of the day, he's another practice squad guy. He was practice squad last year. The Giants probably are not going to keep him around, as an active roster member. They just have too much talent. Saquon, Devontae Booker, Corey Clement. Give me all of those guys over Sandro Platzschumer. Of course, great person. The team was really hyped for him when he made that big run. But at the end of the day, I just don't see him as being, good enough to contribute on this team immediately. Or if he was called upon, just leave him on the practice squad, and then if you need him, you have a guy who can at least come in and play running back for you. The next guy is Tay Crowder, flying all around the field. He didn't really pad the stat sheet too much. Had 2 tackles. But at the end of the day, Tay Crowder's a guy I am dying to see play more and more and more. Next to Blake Martinez as that weak side linebacker, he's an aggressive guy. He's pretty athletic. Coming out of Georgia, I think that he has a tremendous amount of qualities that he can develop and grow upon. He just needs more experience. He had a couple great plays last year. He had that tipped pass that Darnay Holmes picked off against the Seattle Seahawks. which was a big turning point in the game. And I think for the most part, I really want to see Jay Crowder take his game to the next level, show some more prowess, show some more efficiency as a pass coverage linebacker. Also, continue to be aggressive, continue to stuff those gaps. He looked good. He was around the ball at all times. He's really good at rallying and helping his teammates out, a good communicator. He's somebody I want to see starting next to Blake Martinez week 1. But let's talk about a few guys that had their stock decrease, because there's a couple, and there's reasons as to why for some of them. First one, Rodarius Williams, the 6th-round pick out of Oklahoma State. Rodarius Williams really looked pretty good during training camp. He was getting some interceptions. He was making some big pass breakups against guys like Darius Slayton, starters on the Giants offense. Rodarius Williams is a guy I'm pretty high on, but at the end of the day, he kind of crapped the bed during this first preseason game, but there's a reason why. The Giants featured him in the slot predominantly, which is very odd because he's a boundary corner. He has never played slot in his entire career. He is a pure boundary corner, but I think the Giants are just trying to cross-train their players. They want to put them in uncomfortable spots. They want them to gain experience playing at multiple roles, because that's ultimately how you gain value. You know, the Giants have so much depth at outside corner. They have Isaac Yiadom. They have Julian Love. They have Sam Beal, well, currently Sam Beal, Ryan Lewis. You know, these are all guys who are competing. I'm actually not sure. I know they have Madre Harper. I don't know if Ryan Lewis is still here. I don't think so. They have Madre Harper. They have a couple of guys who probably provide more than Rodarius Williams at this point in his career since he's a rookie. But at the end of the day, they want to expand his value as much as possible, and I think Rodarius Williams featuring in that slot spot really gives the Giants an idea of, can he be adaptable? Can they amend his style of play? Can they really get the most out of him as a player? So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to with Rodarius Williams. I think they're going to continue to rotate him in that slot and boundary spot, but hopefully, he can make some plays and make this roster, because I do like him as a player. He's 24 years old, a little bit older than you'd like for a rookie, but at the end of the day, he's a pretty good athlete, and I think he has some good instincts. The next guy on the list is Clayton Thorson. Clayton Thorson must be cut as soon as possible. The second Mike Glennon went down with injury, Thorson, who's also injured, posted 72 yards and a touchdown. He was sacked 4 times and completed 5 passes on 16 attempts. The Giants have nothing to lose at QB3. If your QB3 is in the game, you're losing anyway. So you might as well get something that's at least a developmental player, anything. They did bring in another quarterback, I think a West Virginia quarterback. I'll check him out right now. So they signed, let's see, the Giants brought in Brian Lewerke, Michigan State. Okay, so Lewerke redshirted his freshman year at Michigan State. He completed 722 out of 1,249 pass attempts, 57.7% completion rate for about 8,000 yards and 47 touchdowns and 32 interceptions. For the most part, he kind of sucked, actually. I don't really get this move. Obviously, he was with the Patriots, and the Giants obviously value the Bill Belichick's opinion, because that's, Joe Judge's buddy. So I think they kind of was like, Joe, how is this guy? They were like, oh, he's decent. He can compete. He's young. He has something to offer. He's mobile a little bit. He can throw the ball. I hope he's a quarterback. So I don't know he's going to provide much here, but, it's a player to bring in and compete at the very least. There's not many great options just hanging out on the free agent market. I wish the Giants could find a way to trade for PJ Walker from Carolina Panthers. That guy is a stud. I honestly think he could be starting in this league if he was given the opportunity. I'd love to have him behind Daniel Jones, a mobile quarterback, can run the offense, do some unique things. And if DJ goes down, you really have a guy who actually might being good, God forbid. So let's see what goes on there. The Giants trying to supplement some injuries, but of course, Clayton Thorson's gotta go. Now, the last 2 guys that had their stock go down, Kenny Wiggins and Matt Pert. Kenny Wiggins with Shane Lemieux missing the game, Kyle Murphy getting knocked out due to injury. Wiggins ended up playing the majority of the contest. He had an awful pass blocking grade per PFF, awful run blocking grade. He was just absolutely abysmal. A former Detroit Lion guy, so, the Giants brought in Brian O'Quinn, I think, from Detroit, their head of player personnel. They brought in a bunch of Detroit guys because of him. Wiggins, Reggie Ragland. So when you're even, Kenny Galladay too. So when you're looking at Kenny Wiggins, though, am I trusting him at all as a starter? Absolutely not. In fact, if that happens, we are screwed. Daniel Jones, just run for your life, bro. You should just put on wheelies and wheel around the field, because you're going to need to be out of there ASAP, Rocky. Kenny Wiggins is awful for the most part. At least that's what he showed us. I'm not going to trust him. The Giants need to be looking for offensive linemen ASAP. And when I'm actually looking on Twitter yesterday, Joe Judge did say that they are looking to bring an offensive lineman, and a big point to make is that the Giants are going to have dual practices with the Cleveland Browns and the New England Patriots and the rest of the preseason. So while they are going to be doing a lot of evaluation of themselves, they're also going to be looking at the alternative teams, because they really are going to be looking at those cut candidates, those roster bubble candidates, and there's going to be offensive linemen that are cut that are at least decent. They might not be great, might not be good, but, decent with potential is all we're looking for. Somebody that has some upside. So there will be options there. The Giants will bring in more players, just not any more 34-year-old Ted Larsons. What really does he have to offer at this point? He's washed. He hasn't played a significant amount of snaps in 3 years. So I really would like to see them bring in some young talent, maybe 1-2 years of experience, at least just some action on their resume. And then continue to develop them and help them learn the scheme. Maybe, sometimes a lot of teams cut offensive linemen because they just aren't a scheme fit for them. The Giants transferred over to a slide technique scheme with Rob Sale instead of a vertical sets. So hopefully that will contribute towards the Giants, finding some guys who can fit their mold. Now, Matt Pert also had a down game. He had some decent opportunities to showcase his pass blocking, but this is a player that I just don't think has enough snaps in training camp, right? He just came back a week ago. He has lower back injury. That's been bothering him since April. And I think for the most part, we should be giving him some time, plenty of time for Matt Pert to bounce back. I'm not too worried. It was his first action of the season. Everybody's rusty. But we'll see how it progresses. We'll see how this team kind of bounces back after a tough Jets outing, scoring 7 points. Quite disappointing. But I will say, there's some positives, mostly negatives. Joe Judge did not seem happy after the game about his team's performance. Both sides of the ball started out slow. Of course, you don't have Sterling Shepard out there. You don't have Logan Ryan. You don't have Jabril Peppers. You don't have DJ. You don't have Saquon. You don't have Kenny Golladay. Really, nobody. Evan Ingram. Nobody's out there. So the Giants are really rolling with what they got, really showcasing their depth here. But again, depth players are essential, because if you have a deep team and you need a deep team, it's important, because players really need that. Extra bit of confidence going into the regular season. Injuries happen. Those depth pieces end up becoming big portions of your squad, especially latter portions of the season, maybe even in the postseason. So the Giants here had a lot to dislike, some to like. Carter Coughlin, David Sills really stood out to me. I thought that they looked tremendous, and I'm really excited to see what they can accomplish moving forward, my friends. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, just breaking down a couple of different players, stock up, stock down. We'll have more content coming out in the coming days. Of course, we'll have the preseason game completely covered for you next weekend. So I'm really excited for that. Should be a great time as always. And I hope you guys subscribe below on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.